Okay, I'll just try and find the. Oops. Hmm. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
No, it's just a really narrow strip of your navigation bar. That's all I can see. I don't know
Uh,
if it's just me.
and again, should we? How about that?
That's it. There we go.
Okay, cool. Okay, I think I just created the issues. So we have project management, which is your issue, but okay, welcome everyone to the Singularity Net Archive monthly meeting. I'll just give you a brief preamble. The Singularity Net Archive contains the history of the activities of the SNet Ambassador Program. All content is licensed under open source licenses, and contributions are welcome under Creative Commons licenses as well. We do record these meetings, and our goal is to provide a collaborative platform to the Singularity Net Archive community to share knowledge, ideas, and best practices, and we welcome contributions. Um, so our process is to, first of all, we review action and decision items, which I'll hand over to Vanny in a minute, and then we come back to the project board. Shall I stop sharing and hand it over to you, Vanny?
Yep, can do. Just 1 second, and I will. Right, so here's the summary tool. And I'm just doing our summary live. Just adding Lola in there as an attendee. And let's just go down and look at the decisions from last time and anything that we need to add and change. All right, so last time we said as price was relatively low at 28, what we wouldn't give for it to be 28 now, but we were still saying that we're not really able to pay or submit any pending Q1 tasks. Because obviously Q1 tasks were calculated at a much higher rate. And yeah, I think we were going to pay out at the start of October for Q3, and we haven't done that either because token price has been too rubbish. I think at some point we're going to need to decide what to do. What we could do is a proportional share for those who are due payment and just pay it so that we've got it out of the way. But I think that's probably a discussion to be had between those who are owed. Um, Monthly archive skipbook issues. We just said last time that summaries are still being submitted, and obviously there's fewer meetings happening, but otherwise it's all going well. But yeah, we did notice ongoing issues with summary quality, and it seems to be worsening. Vague and meaningless content, and kind of AI generated and um, without any oversight from the documenter. They're just copying and pasting AI content. So this is still an issue and it needs to be addressed in some way. I think maybe we can take this to a discussion once we finish going through the board, but I am starting to think that the corpus we have is enough to do the work that we're doing on kind of how we use knowledge graphs to mediate a corpus of information. And with token price the way it is, I'm starting to wonder why we're paying people to cut and paste things from Read AI. Why are we paying people 20 quid a time to do that? So I'm starting to feel that maybe it's time we said, right, we've got the corpus that we need. People can document if they want, if they find it necessary or useful, but it's no longer compulsory. And, you know, we don't see it as a thing anymore. The other thing we could do is try to raise it again. Um, it's on the agenda for a governance meeting in the near future to talk about the ethical responsibility that we have to mediate AI generated content and not to just post it uncritically. So that's possibly an approach. Just gonna see Tevo just came in, so I'm just gonna add him as present. But yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about there, and it is still a problem. Um, I
Maybe we
don't
can,
really know.
as you say, maybe at the end of the meeting we can just agree a way direction forward after we've gone through the board, maybe.
Well, I don't think we can agree it ourselves in. I think it may be something that has to go to a workgroup sync call. But anyway, yeah, just to make people aware that it is still an ongoing issue. Knowledge graph development, we just documented what Stephen was doing at that point. So we'll update that with your new updates. This idea of delivering a session on Thursday, the 25th of September, that happened. So, that can be ticked off. And yeah, we discussed a little bit about what kinds of things the community might want to be able to ask a knowledge graph. And I think you'll have updates on that too, Stephen. Um, we also talked about how our knowledge graph outputs could eventually be integrated into the ecosystem. And we talked about things like a Discord bot, integration with the governance dashboard, and so on. So I think these are things that maybe we look at ongoing and maybe things that we look for funding for. And we also looked at the fact that in this quarter, our knowledge graph work is likely to address the different approaches needed for structured data versus unstructured data. So I think, you're probably going to be focusing on structured for now, I guess, Stephen, but it's something that's there.
That's right, yeah.
We also talked about the collaboration with Video Workgroup, where Andre and Malik created a process to automate town hall summaries. So that's cracking. That's seems to be working quite well now. And we talked about the fact that we'd submitted our quarterly report and our Q4 budget, and those were passed. So that's all good. And yeah, I did indeed publicise that session. So yeah, we can say that's done.
Cool. Thanks, Fanny. I'll try and go back to the project board. Hopefully, I've got the. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay. How do we want to handle the issues? Because um, the archives Gitbook updates, you've kind of covered already, haven't you? In
I
the
mean, I can just give a really quick update on why all those issues are still on the board. There are a few glitches with the summary tool at the moment. It's fine for submitting summaries, but it's a bit, yeah, messy for actually approving them. So Andre's having a little bit of a fiddle with that at the weekend, and then I can get all those ticked off. But I don't think we need to, there's nothing to go through on all of those. I need to just close them.
yeah.
So
I think
yeah,
there might I think there might be an issue with one of his GitHub actions not creating the
yeah,
project issue as well. So maybe that.
yeah.
Um, I mean the project management issue. I had to create it manually. So there's no updates for Andre's work apart from what you just mentioned. Then
No, because he's not been funded to do any work this
yeah.
last quarter or this quarter, so no.
Okay. Okay. So graph development for last month I probably should close because that's now that we're now in October. Um, it's done. Okay, I'll summarize some work I've been doing. The last thing I was doing was the presentation to the AI sandbox, demonstrating how we were taking data from the JSON dumps that Andre provides and converting that into format that can be read by graph software like Gphy. And I went through how that could be loaded into Gphy and how you can visualize that graphically. One of the lessons I learned from that was the need to clarify how we are looking at structured data in different graph methods. So it's one thing you can just it's one thing to put data into a tool like that, and you can come up with pretty patterns and networks. But it's really important to our approach is more of a verification to know what we're asking and to know to group the different questions we have more discreetly. So to that end, I've started to tidy up or reorganize the repository for Graph Python scripts. And I'm creating different sections for data analysis and graph analysis, and a section for reports, which aim to be able to produce reports automated from the data. There's also trying to make this repository more user friendly. So once I've done the work, people will be able to come here, if they know Python, they'll be able to create a virtual environment and run the scripts here with the tells you which scripts to write and what they do. I'm also going to put in a map of the repository. This needs further development, where the data sources are coming from. The current data sources are coming from meeting summaries for 2025, but that could expand to different years in future. And also outputs. Currently, there's graphical outputs, but we have also outputs for GP export and markdown reports. So if I dig into a bit more detail into graph analysis, sorry, data analysis. This is the example of data analysis as opposed to graph analysis. So data analysis is just looking at very straightforward things, like, for example, what is the schema of the data that we have? So data, just to verify the structure of data we have, things like that. But graph analysis, I've been working on some fundamental approaches to examining graph structures. And these are very common approaches to see patterns in data using graph methods. So the centrality analysis, clustering, how components are connected, degree of connection or degree of nodes, and path analysis. I'm trying to also give some, in each section, to give some explanation of what's going on here briefly. And then each of those scripts will produce reports separately. So separate reports for each of these methods, but then also to create a unified report. The aim is to create a unified report which you can then refine, so we can just click one button and just get a one report. Here's the first iteration of the unified report. So the aim is to have something that is readable. This still has some technical language in it, but I hope to make this more understandable. So this shows you, well, it's got some technical language, unfortunately. So, but this gives information about the number of nodes and edges that have been identified using different graph approaches. Something that may be more immediately recognizable, this is what I'm hoping to get at, is if we take some degree analysis. In degree analysis, I'm looking at co-attendance. So I'm identifying people and identifying who, well, this describes it here. Take a person, and is that person, what is the degree of that person connected to the most unique other people? So, for example, at the top we have Ashley, and then we have Peter, and then I don't know, Advance, and then Caddy. This means that like the top means that that person has connected with the most other unique individuals. That may be because they attend a lot of meetings. It may be that, there could be lots of different reasons for that. But that gives you some tangible data, which we can then interpret leading on from that. That is okay. Then degree distribution. This is just numbers, but I need to again do the similar sort of thing I've done here to explain what is going on here, and that will tell you, for example, patterns, what different people are doing in relation to different nodes. So that needs to be made into plain English. That's kind of raw data. Then we have JSON field degree analysis. So this is how different fields co-occur with other fields. Um, and then degree distribution and path analysis. Um, the path analysis, I need to get into, all this is doing is showing the deepest paths, but that shows you where the richest, if you like, the richest data is. And naturally, it's agenda items that shows you that there is like if you imagine a tree having a lot of branches, this is where the most branches are. Then most common parent pi, so that just confirms that agenda items create the most branches, if you like, or tree or data. Then we have field centrality or co-occurrence, and this highlights fields that are well connected or act as bridges between other fields. And some of this is already what you would expect, like the people present act as connections to other people, the documenter, the working documents, the purpose of the meeting, the type and the dates, and so on. Those are things that typically form bridges between data. Again, that this needs to be. I want to make the report more user friendly, so we can actually see, well, what is this data telling us here? These terms are the statistical methods used to uh, arrive at the field centrality. Then we have clustering. So these are how tightly, as I said here, a field's neighbors are connected to each other. So, so again, this is raw data. This needs to be refined probably by work group because different work groups would have different types of clusters. Some work groups may have more types of certain decisions, for example, and that will create its own cluster pattern. And again, this is raw data, so it's not very user friendly, but I hope to make this more user friendly, more so you can see, so we can start answer questions about what's going on. Then we have connected components. So these are how different fields or nodes are reachable from each other. So, then it has a sample of the most connections. So these need to be made more explicit and then to sort of like reveal where those connections are coming from, why they're reachable, that kind of thing. So that's the raw first day iteration of a unified report. And each of these is also its own separate report. So each of these is a separate script. For example, here's the centrality analysis support. So that is generated from an individual script, and then I'm trying to explain what's going on here, the interpretation. At the moment, this is semi-technical. You have to have some um, um, acquaintance with graph theory, but I'm aiming to make that more accessible. Yeah. So the overall objective of this is then to produce these reports, and then they are linked to the live data dumps, so they can be updated automatically through a GitHub action. So once we have, for example, refined a particular question, so let's take the reports for unified analysis again. Participants. So let's say we refine the co-attendance analysis, and we find that's answering a useful question. Maybe we can present it better than this. So we can present that table better in a way that says, okay, this is how these are the most connected people, but they're connected in this way. And then we can just have that as a discrete question. Okay. So that can be then, that's one type of question that we can say that we can answer. And that can feed in other sources that feed into other, to be used as a basis to interpret data. Okay, so that's that. Is any questions or thoughts on that, Vanny?
Yeah, just a couple of things. I'm noticing that some of the things we're seeing in this data is largely a function of the meeting summary template that is being used by each particular work group.
Mm,
Things like the most nested data, that is kind of the way it is because of the summary templates that are being used, and it might not continue to be the case. The other thing I'm seeing is I think co-attendance and degree is really interesting, but what we're seeing there is basically based on meeting attendance rather than meeting participation. And I'm sort of wondering if there's a way eventually that we can refine that by, looking at maybe we could do something like correlating it with action items. If you went to a meeting and you had an action item, that is showing maybe you taking more participation in that meeting than if you just attended. And also, I'm interested in how maybe, because there are people who go to meetings a lot and listen and take it all in, maybe don't say a lot, but then they become kind of connectors because maybe they chat to people and have conversations outside of meetings. And they'll be saying things like, oh, yeah, I was in blah, blah, blah meeting and this and that was said. So some of it goes on in communities outside of what we can record. And I'm sort of wondering what we might be able to do to kind of capture that.
yeah, I mean, it'd be very useful to take when you have time to go through each of those different methods and get your thoughts on that, Vanny, because each of those is a standard analysis and it's going to produce some raw data, and that's just the first step. So to sort of like, I need to talk to you to see, for example, what you just said about the meeting templates, for example. So we could then incorporate that within the method of interpreting that data. So we can then say, well, given this meeting template, this is the depth of the path, for example, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, rather than just me doing it, I'm sort of thinking that we're not really funded for this, but
No, I
I'm
know.
thinking that it would be really interesting to sit down with one of these reports or some of these reports when you've sort of done the stuff you're going to do around the language and clarifying it and all that, and sit down with a few people who are active in the ambassador program and go, okay, what are we seeing here? What does it mean? What do you think it shows?
Mm.
Because there's going to be stuff that everyone here will think of that I wouldn't think of. I'm sort of wondering if maybe we could have a session like that instead of an archives meeting one time this
Yeah.
quarter.
I mean, I suppose I need to just select um, easy candidates. I suppose the obvious first candidate is the degree analysis of co-attendance. So because that's like this table here, for example, because that involves people. It's quite explainable what's going on there, and also it may be very sensitive to interpretation and meaning. For example, someone may have a lot of connections because they just attend a meeting, or do they have a lot, or do they have a lot of connections because they are active in other ways, that kind of thing. So this co-attendance analysis could be enhanced by combination with, but by asking additional questions like what kind of connections does Caddy have, for example, that causes her to have that degree of connections. Yeah. So that's the kind of way we refine it. And then we'd have to do that for each one. So that's degree analysis. A path analysis, again, that could be sensitive to meeting templates, okay? Because as you pointed out earlier, Vanny, you're going to have different, if you imagine them as different tree shapes, the shape of the template that the archive workgroup uses might be different from the governance, or depending on which template the work group is using, it's going to create different pathways. And it's going to be very important to know that so you don't make assumptions across different pathways, across all data. So you segment that data. And I suppose that would affect all of these methods in some ways, particularly like, well, centrality as well. Um, the yeah, so um, so you suggested maybe our next meeting, rather than being, say, an archive meeting straightforwardly, we should focus on a particular approach. Do you think, Vanny?
Yeah, because I'm just thinking that, what with token price being as it is, maybe we don't need to be having archive meetings, because you're going to be sort of digging into what you're working on
Yeah,
rather than. So, yeah, but if you felt like we'd be ready to have a session like that, then we could do that in November. I don't know.
yeah,
I'm just seeing in the chat, Tebo saying, my mind is blanking to see some useful insight. Comparing data might be interesting, but comparing it with what? I guess I'm not really talking about comparing data. I'm talking about looking at what the analysis shows and trying to work out what that means. Because say, for instance, what if we just look at that cold and what's on the screen now, and we knew nothing about it
mm.
and nothing about the community, it seems to be saying that, that Ashley, that you're the most connected person. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Because
Yeah,
I figure you go to a lot of meetings, but you also have a lot of conversations like outside meetings. I think you have sort of real connections with lots of people. And I kind of what that makes me think is, oh, I wonder if you're sort of able to have those conversations and you know what's going on because you go to a lot of meetings. And I suppose I'm just thinking it might show us different ways of being involved.
mm.
Because, like, it's weird. I don't go to a lot of meetings. I'm on there as number four, but I go to like the meetings of maybe four work groups. But maybe maybe it's picking up that I do a lot of action items or, whatever. So I suppose it's just trying to use this data to get some insights into what it's actually telling us about our own community. And is it true? Is it accurate? Rather than comparing data with data, it's more comparing data with what we
Mm.
experientially know, our
Yeah.
lived experience of being in the ambassador program.
I mean, I was just responding to what Tivo was saying there. I mean, what we're doing here is not so much data analysis, it's more structural analysis. And it's something I've had to get my mind around with graphs and how graphs can contribute to AI, for example, or large language models. Like, so traditionally, we have a data set and you can do data analysis on that, like the number of work groups, the number of attendees. What we're doing here with these graph methods, we, 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 we're trying to visualize how the relationships between these things work, and what sensitivities there are to these patterns. It's not, and also it's not really about comparing one data set with another data set. It's really just trying to build a map of what we have. And so, and the reason why we're doing that is so that we can agree conceptual structures for questions that we have. Like, as you've articulated, Vanny, why, what is the reason you have the degree of connections that you have? Okay. And there's different reasons for that. And why is that useful information? Because that tells you conceptual information about, say, Ashley or Peter or Callie. and in the way that they conceptually differ, not necessarily how, that not the raw data. If you just compare the raw data, you'd say, oh, this person has more connections than that person, but that's not what that means. It
I'm not sure
means
I
something
understand.
else conceptually. Is that helpful,
Right now,
Thibault?
yeah, actually I was like answering
Yeah,
in the first part one question and then like brought up the comparison because I'm feeling like, okay, I see the same kind of tables when I look at the treasury.
yeah,
Then
yeah,
I
yeah,
just like looked up the core contributor calculations and like the two top unique people are Ashley and Peter
yeah,
because basically they are in all meetings and they are not recognized as any contributors, even though this doesn't really bring that up. But on my side, I can see, okay, they're like everywhere and that probably affects the degree of reason because you're looking at summaries and each JSON file is, I assume, one summary, and then
yeah,
like you see that each JSON file has these two names there the
yeah.
most often.
I mean, you could apply this. I mean, this is another reason why I'm breaking these into different scripts, Tivo, because the same method could apply to any data set. So you could apply this to the Treasury data set as well. I'm trying to make it as generic as possible. So it would be interesting, for example, at some point to take, say, another data set, say governance data or treasury data, yeah, in and you had it in a discrete, let's say by year, let's say, and then you could apply these different methods to it and see what patterns you get from that. And then you could also compare those patterns with these patterns in this from this data set. Danny, sorry.
Yeah, I'm just thinking it's really interesting that similar patterns are visible in the Treasury data and the core contributor calculations. But I think as you go on, Stephen, it might be that you are ending up thinking about weighting different kinds of data because there is stuff that is unique to the archive which wouldn't appear in like Treasury or whatever else. Things like action items, things like um involvement in, whether you're mentioned in a decision and something like, yeah, I suppose what I'm talking about is maybe when you start moving towards looking at unstructured data as well as structured data, we're going to see different patterns emerging. But,
Yeah,
it raises interesting questions about what attendance at a meeting tells you. Because I think if you know the person, you can read in a lot. But if you don't, say like for instance, I'm looking at advanced AMIO there. I think some of that might be because data hasn't been updated, and I think he's showing us higher than maybe he really will be.
mm,
But also, I haven't really talked to him for ages, so I don't know what he's going to. I don't know what he's, who he's connecting with and stuff like that. But I think the data in that we've got in the archive might be able to give us a fuller picture of what somebody's connections are and what their influence is beyond just attending meetings. But I suppose the other question I want to raise is like we seem to be looking quite a lot at influence. And,
mm,
that is a focus. It's quite an interesting focus. But I think obviously it's a matter of what you've got time to do. But I think there are other elements of information that this very rich data set can tell us. The one that springs to mind is things like decisions. Which work groups are making decisions that affect everyone? Which work groups are making decisions that are purely internal? Which work groups are meeting and spending an hour talking about what day they should meet on? Do you know what I mean?
yeah. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind there is that it's possible to combine methods. So let's say you take an element of the data set. In this case, you're saying it's very much like a social network. And in fact, this is how social network analysis at a very basic level works, is through this kind of degree analysis. And the nodes in this case are individuals, they're people, but they could also be work groups. So I could do exactly the same thing here, but with work groups. And that would be a very interesting, like work group analysis, in contrast to um, individual analysis. I mean, they also could help explain each other as well, as you say, because you're getting different kinds of information from, if we just looked at this from a work group perspective, from an individual perspective. The other thing that occurred to me as you were speaking as well, Fanny, let's say you take this data and you want to find out what's going on here, is that you then use this as your selection. So you say, here's your data set. These are the top nodes by degree for individuals. This is the amount of connections that this individual has. Let's take that data and then apply, say, a path analysis to it. So if you apply the path analysis, I can imagine you would see, well, what are the connections that Ashley has? What are the connections that Peter has? Where do those paths take you, you know? And that's where you could have combinations of things. That could tell you, again, that's very much in the social influence, as you were saying, Vanny. But if it's work groups, you could also apply the same method to work groups.
Yeah, I think the interactive session might be more interesting if the path analysis actually shows the source material, not
Yeah,
just the path itself. So then we could be like, somebody has, okay, for example, the advanced manual is, I think, a very good candidate. Like, I have no fucking clue either how he's the top candidate and what he's doing. And like getting this part of, okay, this section in this meeting summary, you can read about something that he made that influenced that decision, and then we could like go into it, and maybe that builds like a mental clarity. Oh, advance is working on these things, and this is affecting like this, and that's why it influenced like that. But I wondered, like, what Vanessa is like, can you weight the path, like,
yeah,
separate it, and then, like, so, well, assuming that we have a session and, like, okay, this is actually maybe not that relevant for us, but it always, we put that name there because it's bureaucratically more makes sense, and then you
yeah,
just, like, tune it down, and it doesn't really affect the score anymore.
yeah. I mean, what I'm showing on the screen here is a raw script of. I just did this the past week, and this is a raw path analysis. So basically, it's taking all the data that we have in 2025, and seeing what unique paths are in that data. A unique path would be any connected nodes, any route between connected nodes that are connected. And obviously, there's going to be quite a few of them. There's going to be like nearly 7,000 of them. And then it's going to ask, well, what's the maximum depth of that path, like the number of connections? And that tells you six, and then the average depth. So that tells you something, but it's kind of it's not very helpful, as you point out, Tivo, because it's just telling you something about all the data. So just imagine if this was applied to a subset of the data, you could apply this to, for example, the degree. If you applied it to what we just sort of talk about, like who about individuals, what are the paths of individuals, you know? And in this case, it's just taking the deepest JSON paths, and it just happens to take agenda items. But if we just filtered that out, we could just see instead of agenda item, imagine that these are individuals, and it would tell you what routes they're taking. So again, uh, this is all very abstract as I describe it. I agree with you, Thibaut. We need to provide more concrete examples to people to show, well, this is what happens when you have the data. This is what it looks like, Danny. Hello, Danny?
Sorry, I thought I was
Oh,
off mute and I
no.
wasn't. Yeah, I'm just wondering, with particularly this kind of, deepest JSON paths and things, where we've said that that is probably partly to do with the structure of the meeting summary template that's being used.
Yeah.
For instance, some templates don't actually have a field called agenda item, but they do have fields that are the same thing. You know, they're called in this meeting we discussed or whatever. Is it possible to tell the graph that these two things, these three things are equivalent and have it work from that? Because the field is called something in the JSON, which it might
Yeah,
be good to be able to, you get what I mean? Is
yeah,
that possible?
yes, it is. And again, it's something we need to. Part of the problem is so many questions we ask. We probably need to start with a very simple. So I probably will start with people, and let's take that kind of. I can't remember where I put the file now, but let's say the number of connections that someone has or people have. Yeah. And then we look at that data set. We have that as a data set, and then we say, okay, let's look at the connections that the nature of the connections that those people have, and then we can filter that by types of meeting, for example, yeah, or different work group templates, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is where weighting comes in as well,
Yeah,
because if we're talking about kind of the influentialness of a work group, some work groups, it kind of feels like they do their stuff. I sort of sometimes think archives is a bit like this. We do our stuff in our corner, and I'm not sure, except when we go to think tank and go, ta-da, this is what we've been doing. I don't know how connected it is, but so
mm,
if you only came to archives meetings, you wouldn't be picked up as particularly influential. But if you go to I'd say governance, because it meets so often and it makes decisions that affect people much more strongly, then maybe that's worth more in terms of influence. I
yeah.
don't know.
I mean, there's two elements here. One is the first step is to look at the raw data and to not apply any value judgment to it. But then you find out, then you see patterns in data. So you see, for example, a person with lots of different connections, but most of those connections, let's say most of the connections for that person are just attending meetings, whereas another person may not attend many meetings, but they may say produce a lot of documents or make a lot of decisions or something. Now, when you see those patterns, you'll say, just from a neutral perspective, they're just patterns. But then you can apply weights to the edges of that. So you can say the edges for with people, so people who have connections with, say, decisions a lot may have a bigger weight or different kind of weight than someone who just has a connection that's just attendance. Tivo.
Yeah, on a similar path of like recognizing, I think where we need like combination is which work group and which people and how many decisions and action items produced by these people in this meeting. Because and why I wonder that this could be a good information to have is that we can then reapply that as like a default layer when if we do this sentiment style of like budgeting again this quarter.
Mm. Yeah, okay,
And
that's
instead of like making people to say which work groups they are or where they think they're influential, maybe we could use the summaries and then that is kind of incentivizing people to recognize people in the meetings. Like,
yeah,
for example, I don't think even I like request people to write people's name in agenda items. Like agenda item is like agenda item, and decision is decision. But I don't really like say where this decision came from. But all the people in the meeting are kind of affecting the decision, even though
yeah,
I'm in the meeting somewhere and I'm not able to kind of tell who is really participating and who is listening and learning.
yeah. I suppose you have to be careful with that as well. But also, you're going to get a lot of hidden. Well, in any situation, you can have hidden contributions, aren't you? So let's say you go to a meeting and lots of people discuss how to make a decision, let's say, but maybe you don't capture that data. But you could capture that data maybe from a transcript of the meeting, for example, and you could apply a kind of, not exactly sentiment. You could apply a semantic analysis of the transcript to see, for example, who spoke most of the time in relation. But even that doesn't tell you everything. But so again, it's going back also to, particularly if it's related to um, conclusions about, for example, the level of contribution people make. As you said, so, it's going to be, I think you have to be really careful there in terms of what inferences you make. Um, yeah, but I take on point your thing about, obviously, I need, the centrality of people is maybe a very useful introduction, but probably need to look at the centrality from a work group perspective, as you say there. And I'll try and draft some scripts that will go in that direction, Fanny.
Yeah, for me, this raises really big, interesting questions about what we actually mean by contributing, which I think is being discussed in a few other places as well. And that just made me think that one of the interesting things is if we can look at, for example, agenda items or whatever they are called, and look at also tags and try to see where topics are being brought up repeatedly and
Yeah,
where that might have come from. Because say like if somebody, I do notice it when I read the summaries that you can see that somebody was in such and such a meeting where blah 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 was discussed. And when you read the summary, they actually bring it up and say, oh, this was discussed over in this work group. I think we should talk about it. And I think we could do with looking at the tags because I think that's a piece of structured data
yeah.
which we've got and which could be interesting. But yeah, it's kind of that as an analytic thing, but also just to note that this question of what do we mean by participation is being discussed in a lot of places. And it often seems to me that when token price is low, we start talking about it because we start to think, yeah, what are people getting paid for? What's the contribution? So it feels like it's becoming a governance issue as well. And as always, archives and good documentation is a support for governance questions.
Yeah. I mean, Jim, you still got your hand up. Do you want to say something? Has he gone away? Hello, Tebow? No, okay. Maybe he's away from the.
Oh, no, didn't even notice this came up.
Okay, I
I'm
thought.
actually in the kitchen doing
Oh,
eggs.
sorry, I thought your hand was up. I thought you were gonna. But your point about, gosh, what are you saying? The incentivizing people to update information. I mean, you probably know that's quite problematic, isn't it, Manny? Because it's not just
Yep.
people. Yeah, exactly. Because it's it's not necessarily about, there's a quantity and quality issue, isn't there? So I don't know. My view is that you probably should expect a minimum level of people recording what they do. I know this has been something that we've been discussing for years, actually. But to my mind, if people have been paid for a contribution, for example, or incentivized for contribution, but again, you have to make that to a level which, because people, for example, some people are good at writing summaries, some people are terrible at writing summaries, for example. So,
And it's also back to the old question that recurs constantly of what do we mean by work?
yeah,
There's things that people do that are not easily going to appear in this archives corpus, but they keep the ambassador program running.
yeah. I mean, the fact that even attendance, the fact that someone attends something is significant. It's not the only thing that's significant, but it is significant. So it's about, again, when it comes to, let's say that's a node and an edge. So the node is a person, the edge is they attend, and the other node is a meeting, let's say. Now, that edge, Tivo, the weight that you apply to it is a judgment call. So let's say you want to give an attendance a certain score, then you could add a score to that edge. And that would then you could apply that to your data set and that would tell you how you want to say reward that or something, Vanny.
I'm also sort of thinking that we need to maybe think about how we integrate other sources of data
Yeah,
into these knowledge graphs. Tevo's already mentioned treasury data and so on, but in governance work group, we have got a session planned for this quarter about kind of invisible work, volunteer work, what we mean by work, what people do that doesn't get paid or recorded or anything. I'm tr gonna try and get people adding to a Google form to kind of say what they do that is unrecognized and unrecorded. And that could be something that could be fed in as well. But, I think we've got more sources than just meeting summaries. And I also think quite a lot of it is buried in the documents that get linked in summaries. So,
yeah.
you know,
I mean,
even
unfortunately,
creating a document, even the
yeah,
person who created a document is a thing as well. And I think Andre's work on Google APIs could help us identify who has created documents that are linked in meeting summaries. So that could be another
yeah,
piece of
absolutely,
weighting.
absolutely. But again, it's about bandwidth because
Oh
that's
yeah, yeah, I know,
yeah.
I know. I'm not trying to.
I mean, for example, I find it quite frustrating. Let's take document links. So the JSON file for each workgroup meeting summary varying. I know it varies a little bit from template to template. They often include a link to external documentation. Now you could write a script quite, I mean, I could just do that full time. I could just write a script that would go and look for those documents, let's say they're Google documents or something, and extract those data. And we could create graphs out of that, but that will require a semantic method. So we do interpretation of the text. So, for example, I think Thibaut mentioned it earlier. Let's say, or even you, Vanny, where let's say you have a decision made in a work group, okay, but when you look at the linked document, you find out that this person and this person contributed to it because there is a documentation of a discussion or something, yeah, and you would only find that out by doing semantic analysis of the linked document. So
Not entirely. I'm just thinking, the fact of the being the person who creates the document tells you something.
yeah,
So even if we
yeah,
could just aggregate who owns all the documents that get
but
produced, I think
the,
that would tell you a lot.
yeah, but also, and that's where the judgment call comes into it, and where we have to feed it back to the community. So let's say we have an intuition that people who create documents that are linked are significant for the sake of argument, mainly because maybe they're mostly the person who creates the document tends to be the author of the content. Then that's an assumption, but it's probably maybe it's true, maybe it isn't true. You
You
know,
could also add in, is it open for comments? Is it open for edits? I mean,
yeah,
I just think back to Felix. Every document he created was open for everyone to edit, and they became a co-author. So, but some people, they create documents that only they can edit, and that tells you something as well. I
yeah,
don't know, there's all these little data points that maybe I'm just making assumptions about what they mean, but I do think they are interesting.
yeah. I mean, we're not going to. I mean, because of limited time, I'm just trying to. First of all, I'm again, I mean, Tiva, that's my interest. I'm just focused on uh, structural analysis. So there are many other methods of graph analysis that are not just structural. So my analysis won't include, in the first instance, things like semantic analysis, like it won't sample free text and vectorize it to see, let's say, what is the implication of the text meaning. That's a whole different method. But what we can do is say, let's say, how many documents are linked by how often does a work group link documents, for example, and that may tell you something to look into further. So again, it's about where we look next. But where we start from, I'm afraid we can just start with just by creating a kind of a map, which is going to look similar to And does that map look similar to other data sets like treasury data, as you pointed out, Thibault? Like the map will show you, for example, here's how lots of people are connected to lots of other people. And also, by the way, those people are paid for this contribution or that contribution. So it's not surprising there'll be similarities there. Um, but
I think Vani has a pretty good point of like the next action in a sense that having a discussion and looking at existing results because like think like as we discussed, we see that we can go anywhere, we can
yeah,
explore anything,
yeah.
but what is the thing that we actually need for the next decision? And see if we can like help us make a decision based on the result of these analyses.
What decision do you have in mind?
Well, we mentioned already like who is the work group stuff and decision, like who making decision. I think this is like good relevance in a sense that when we do this budgeting in a similar fashion where people's opinion of is it good or bad or like the rating, how it affects that work group, that's kind of give like a tool to give it like more unbiased, maybe. Well, it's still biased by meeting somebody, but
Okay.
a different style of stuff. Um, Another thing is probably like just learning about each member, but I don't know how to kind of, I
I
don't know,
sort of
like,
think maybe it would be a session to have a look at what we've got and sort of get people's analytical minds thinking about, or what does that show, or what could it show, and then move from there to what information should we be looking for next, because it would show us something that we want to see, if you see what I mean.
yeah, maybe these why questions what other people are having, like,
Yeah, I'll
yeah,
try.
Ash,
I mean, I'm going to try. I mean, I'm listening to what we're saying here. I'm going to try and do as much analysis as possible, but this already gives some pointers. Um, I mean, but also is something that we need to, that I can bring back to people, I suppose. That's what would be helpful. I mean, you seem, I mean, something that seems to be coming out is decision making. So that's something I can certainly do. For example, I could do path analysis, degree analysis on that, and see how people are connected to decisions, how work groups and people are connected to decisions, that kind of thing. Yeah. So certainly we can do that. Um,
I wonder also like the agenda items. Like you said, you don't
yeah,
see semantics, like meaning. That does it mean that you're not able to differentiate the agenda? You just know, okay, there was five agendas, but you don't know what they're about. Like if
yeah,
you're able to differentiate them, then that might be also be interesting. Like, okay, we have these 10 groups of agendas that happen across everywhere. Like everybody's talking about budget, everybody's talking about project, I don't know,
Mm.
task, but some of them talk about interviews, but many of them don't. And so
Would
if
that
you're
be
able to,
easier done via tags rather than trying to semantically analyze
oh yeah,
agenda
yeah.
items, which can be done in really wordy ways? People will sometimes write an agenda item in a quite wordy way.
is that part of the JSON structure? Do you have a tag
Mm.
that's associated with an agenda item?
Not directly, no, but you will see that, if um, discussing what we are going to do about the Q4 budget, blah, 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 and there will be a tag for Q4 budget. So they are
Yep.
connected, even though you can't see like a direct connection between the tag and the agenda item. They will appear in the tags, and it just feels that because tags are more succinct,
Okay.
Yeah.
maybe it would be
So
easier.
getting maybe even just a simple thing like how many of these specific tags is being used, and from then associating with the person, how often that person had this tag associated with.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I do. I'll be careful about putting people central, though, I would say.
yeah, maybe.
I would be very conservative about it, it's just because you don't want to make assumptions about people. It's much better to make assumptions about tags and agenda items, and and then to go that way.
Saying that though, people and
I
people
know.
know themselves. So if you did base it around people and then say, do you agree with what this is saying? People will have an opinion. Whereas if you go, oh, do you agree with what this analysis is saying about this tag? People will go, don't know. So,
Yeah, I'm just afraid of stereotypes like Tebow is the one who always tags with this in this way, or Vanny is the one who always tags in this way, kind of thing.
I mean, I would
Um,
be a little concerned because I know a lot of meeting summaries tend to be very under-tagged. And when I was sort of doing oversight of meeting summaries, I would often add loads of tags,
hmm.
but obviously I'm not doing that
I
anymore.
mean, the patterns and agenda items is an interesting one. That I'm trying. I don't know. I can't think of the JSON structure off the top of my head, but the agenda item includes what decisions and what.
Only for a certain type of meeting summary template that an agenda item has a little bit of discourse about what the agenda item was, what we discussed, and then there'll be a decision and possibly action items associated with it.
So agenda items do vary by template.
Yeah, I mean, for some, agenda items are just, you know, listed, and then there's like a free text
Okay.
narrative.
So it's clear we're going to have to segment by template for everything, particularly, really.
Partly, I mean, I think you could do some of it by what I was saying before, like telling it that in this meeting we discussed field is the same as agenda items field.
Okay.
So
So, but just
to an extent.
how many templates are there? There's four, isn't there? Or three? Or
Um, there's three
there's
really.
three.
Yeah.
So all the data can be segmented into those different. Okay, that might. Well, again, not. Yeah. I mean, I think certainly the gender items could be a useful way to look at decision analysis, but I need to think about how to do that. Um, any other? This is great.
Another
Yeah.
interesting field that people don't always use very much, but I think is the decision relevant to this work group or does it apply to, may it affect other people? I think that could be an interesting one.
Fact. Okay. Okay, that's really good. Yeah. I mean,
Oh,
just
and the thought of like weighting um people's presence in a meeting if they are listed as facilitator or documenter, because obviously they're doing more then, aren't they? They are actively participating.
right. I'm going to put here how to apply weighting after the fact because this is a judgment call. Um, but it kind of implies a procedure that implies an ethical procedure as well, Vanny.
Yeah, that's
So,
very true.
so for example, let's say person X makes this decision in such and such a way, and because they do that, we give that weight to that decision. For example, I don't know. Yeah, but so I need to think about that, and it's kind of I thought it was going to be I thought it was going to be something I wouldn't be doing for straight away, but now I realise it could be like hand in hand with decision analysis, for example. So if you find agenda items, let's say look at agenda items, and you have a set of decisions, um, yeah, that's only going to tell you some very basic information like who's connected. So yeah, I have to think about that. Okay, to try and put weightings into that. And by the way, I mean, this also might interest you, Tivo. This also can transform the data. So we could take the data set, do graph analysis of it, and create another data set. And then that data, so for example, let's say we applied weight, we agreed between ourselves that these decisions are significant, and that produce another data set, which then could be used something else, like for rewards or something, as you pointed out, Tivo. Okay, shall we Is there any other thoughts on that, or shall we bring this section to a close? I'll take that as a yes. Is there any other business? Vanny, do you have any other business or?
Oh, just date and time of next meeting. I mean, are we going to say that we're not having a formal archives meeting in November, but we might have a session of the kind that we've talked about? Should we say that definitely?
Yeah, I mean, I could focus on just, I mean, there's some great feedback from this meeting, which will allow me to produce scripts and for the next meeting. The more time I have to do that would be better from my
Mm,
perspective.
definitely.
I would prefer early December, if that's possible. Um,
Yeah, I think that would be good.
and then also, I mean, I'll try and aim for something where people can feed into it. Um, so I'll try and think of some use cases of, for example, decision analysis or, everything that people have been talking about today. So that's very useful. Okay, shall I stop recording?